got 152 yards. Should be just a nice, comfortable 9-iron for him. They're going to go nuts when he hits this thing.
That's dirt.
Yo, what's up, friends? We did it again. Happy to have you here. My name is Joe Idoni. At Tour Picks is a place you can find me on X, and this is the Preferred Lines podcast. This week on tap, we'll be reviewing a little bit of last week of what happened in the Amex, take a victory lap or two. Why not? You got to smoke them when you got them. We'll do some course notes, a little bit of stat modeling preview in regards to Torrey Pines, and then we will dish out some picks to win with one of the absolute best in the industry at doing so. Transparent, proven winner, awesome member of the RotoBaller PGA team. We'll bring him on in just a few minutes. We'll get some picks to win the 2025 Farmers Insurance Open. As always, this show is brought to you with the support every single week by the good people over at RotoBaller PGA. The promo code, if you would like to get involved, you have my articles up there every week. My guests, unbelievable deep dives into everything you possibly need to know to get you prepared for the week in betting, and DFS is available there as well. Horse for the Course preview is up now. Our boy Ian has deciphered Torrey Pines North and South course to an unbelievable degree this week as well. Lines is the promo code, get you 10% off over there at RotoBaller PGA. Thank you to them as always for continuing to support this show and being the presenting sponsor. Listen, DB, what's up, man? We hit it last week. Nick Taylor, Sepp Straka back-to-back. We will be looking to make a three-peat this week with a little bit of good fortune. Hopefully the golf gods will continue to shine brightly upon us. But without further ado, let's bring the guest onto the show this week. Welcoming back to Preferred Lines. This may be the third, fourth, maybe the fifth time. I bring him on whenever I need a little bit of course stuff and some great insight as well. Like I mentioned, 8 or 9 straight years of winning golf picks, proven, every pick documented, completely transparent. Welcome back to the program, Spencer Aguiar. It's awesome to have you on. It's great to be a part of a team with RotoBaller with you once again, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, Joe. We talked a little bit before this show. It's an absolute pleasure having you a part of this team. We have a really tight-knit unit. Joe Nicely's crushing it with his showdown stuff. You've gone back to back. I mean, honestly, Joe, if there's another week like that from the two of you, I might need to change my name to Joe so we can push the success forward that way, because it's been a lot of early season success from you guys.
Yeah, and Joe is going on the brunt of a couple of late bogeys that have cost him from taking home huge winners in the DFS world. Lucky that this has kind of been the season where, after last season, which was an absolute grind of finishing second, it's nice to have a couple of guys come through. Can't imagine a better start to the season. A couple back-to-back long shot winners. I was screaming Sepp Straka to anyone who would listen on the numerous shows that I did last week. I'm starting to get a little Nick Taylor vibe from the guy, and he's got real, genuine winning equity and moxie when he gets into contention, Spencer. It's his third win in less than 3 years. He's got 8 top threes throughout that span. He's won a playoff event, or he's finished runner-up in a playoff event. He's finished second in a major now. Just highly undervalued Sepp Straka, how he could come into an event with a weak field like that at a number like 70 or 80 to 1. Now inside the top 20 in the world. Where are you at with Sepp?
I think it's one of the things that I talk about quite frequently on any of the podcasts that I do or any of the written work that I put out at RotoBaller. You have certain golfers, and it's one of the things that I always measure in my model, and it's sometimes course specific with it. It's sometimes from a statistical outlook, but there are certain players that when you put them at the right facility, they have a higher upside. They have a higher win equity than some of these prices than we generally get for them. And these are the unique spots where you can take advantage. I was not as fortunate as you were to go with the Nick Taylor, Sepp Straka route, but it's those types of names where I always say this, whether it's with outright betting, DFS, any of those answers. People play things too conservatively. And I think that high upside profile, while there is the bust potential that comes into play, you're always trying to shoot for the moon when it comes to GPP contests or outright tickets. And Sepp certainly provides that at the core. One of the best ball strikers in the world when he can put the pieces together. And we saw that last week from him.
That's it. The shooting for the moon stuff. And that's what really, this show is focused and centered around the ethos of outright betting, right? So we're looking for that. GPP contests are very similar in that regard, but you have to understand that when you run some of the stat modeling stuff, you do a fantastic job. I'll pull up my model here shortly and break down the top 10 that I have this week for the farmers. But you have to understand what you're looking for in that model. And with Sepp Straka, yes, you get that bust potential, but I think with an outright pick, you get that huge high-end upside, closing ability. He had everything sort of checked boxes in terms of courses with a high degree of difficulty and water and things like that last week. But ultimately, it comes down to, I'm going to take a long shot pick on a guy. Do I believe he can actually win this golf tournament? And when you look at someone like Nick Taylor, who has multiple career wins, Sepp Straka now with 3 wins in the last 3 years, you can really put some faith and belief in that. Another guy, Spencer, now this isn't PGA Tour related, but I want to talk about it. Shown a ton of winning equity over the last couple of years. Tyrrell Hatton wins again in Dubai over on the DP World Tour. His accolades are sort of beginning to just continue to stack on top of each other despite making that departure to live. I think they have a clear 1-2 punch in Rahm and Bryson, but do you think Hatton's the third best player on live right now?
Well, here's the thing, Joe, and I know this is going to be a controversial take with you because if you look at Koepka, we'll use Koepka for an example here, and you get the high upside with him in these major championships. I've always been a believer that if you are looking at Tyrrell Hatton as a golfer, he is probably the third best player that is just naturally there. That would be above Koepka. Dustin is kind of in the later stages of his career. He's not exactly where Rahm and Bryson is because those are major championship winners. And I understand Koepka has that same profile, but he also hasn't really been that for the last year or so with it. And things happen, things change with it. I think Hatton was one of the bigger losses, unfortunately, that the PGA Tour ended up losing. Very fun profile and person to watch around the golf course. You were always going to get the combustible nature around him, but an elite golfer that I agree with you when we talk about actual win equity. I always thought markets for the PGA Tour were too low on him. And we have now started to see the respect in the markets. Even when he enters these major championships, he's usually one of the more savvier, sharp picks that moves right up the leaderboard. And when you win tournaments like he just won, you're not going to necessarily get these enhanced prices anymore. So, golf will be in a better state, Joe, when everybody is back in the same location. I don't know if we're going to ever get there again. I don't know when we're going to get there if we do, but there's big losses with Hatton, Bryson, Rahm. Those are probably, in theory, in my opinion, the 3 biggest losses, whether we're talking talent or we're just talking about personalities, at what they bring to the mix.
Totally. Entertainment aspect of Tyrrell Hatton in a tournament that he wins. He, of course, had to destroy a tee marker along the way and create some headlines there. But yeah, I agree. Third best player. I got him over Koepka right now. I got him over Cam Smith. I got him over Joaquin Niemann. I got him over Dustin, certainly. Guy is playing awesome. 2 guys winning this week who could potentially fill out that Ryder Cup roster for Europe come to New York this year. Hatton needs these wins. He needs these DP World Tour points, not only in a Ryder Cup year, but in a year where I'm not sure how much longer his major exemptions are going to be up, and getting into things like the U.S. Open and the PGA Championship and even the Masters. At some point feels like it's going to start to fade away as Liv is still in search for those OWGR points. So good on Hatton for continuing to come through on weeks like this when it really matters to him. Speaking of bouncing around different leagues, wanted to talk to you just briefly, Spencer, about your thoughts on TGL. Tomorrow night, I'll be there again representing the RotoBaller brand. I'd say it's a very, very important week for TGL. The first week had the circus aspect to it. Everyone was going to tune in. Of course, they stacked Tiger in week 2. Ratings will drop tomorrow. Now, how far does that cliff fall? That's going to be the biggest question. I think there was issues with the timing of the broadcast in week 1 that may have been ironed out and was better week 2. Week 2 clearly had some issues with the tech. Unfortunately for TGL, and I feel bad for them in this regard, they've basically spun the roulette wheel twice and it landed on 0, and that they've got 2 completely uncompetitive matches that have been blowouts and over through the halfway point. As someone like yourself, who is relentless about seeking an edge, guys, I'll let you in a little insight. So we do the roundtable DFS for sport, and Spencer refuses to put his picks out until he has all the available information on ownership. That's how committed you are to finding an edge in your craft. Is there any edge that you've found to be had in betting something like TGL thus far?
I don't know. I haven't put enough research into it, Joe. I think as we move forward with it, there may be something to be said about a statistical profile if we can actually get more and more data. I've watched very little of it. The amounts that I've seen, though, that I do like what they're doing is it seems like they have put a lot of the stats up there. You see the club head speed, the ball speed. There's a lot of different things that they are putting out there that is very encouraging, because for me, I've always thought this with any sport that there is, whether it is on a simulator or it's actually on the field, betting is one of the biggest catalysts that can push it in the direction of being more of a mainstream sport. You have to have people that are willing to gamble money on it. Mm-hmm. And until we can actually get people, and you're doing a great job over at RotoBaller of covering the sport, and maybe we get more statistics out there and we can run some of the data, because there's, from a statistical perspective, a lot of corollary trends that we should be able to see. We can, and you can tell me if this answer's out there. I don't know enough about this right now, but like before the matches, do we know the exact par yardage? Do we know what the holes look like? So like based off of that information of it being a yes there's an ability to run a model that should be very straightforward with it, that you can look at all of the PGA Tour data that we have and, kind of run it in a very similar capacity with it. So I think that if we can actually figure out a way to market this and for people to want to gamble on this, that is probably where the longevity comes into play. My biggest concern that I see, at least from my perspective here, is how many weeks can we have somebody remove themselves from a golf tournament that kind of stems around the TGL thing? Like, it's Tom Kim is really the only person I think that chose the golf tournament over the TGL. And even Tom Kim last week ended up missing the cut. So, we're going to have to find a happy middle there. To me, this is probably not best suited in the middle of the start of the golf season here. Like, this would be fun to put together during the fall when you don't have all these players in action, and we can then see a lot of those big names. I don't know if they'll ever go in that direction, but that to me would be more of the selling point.
A couple of really good points there. I do not think these two withdrawals are related to any sort of travel or fatigue from TGL. I think that they happen to be coincidence. I know that reports came out that Xander is dealing with like a soft tissue rib injury that apparently he's been dealing with for some time. I'm not sure. I haven't heard much on the Morikawa thing yet. But in terms of finding an edge, yeah, I'm working on something. I want to have a full understanding before I put myself out there and start to, try to work on a model and things like that. So I think continuing to understand the tech, continuing to understand the whole layouts, half of them are a third of them are par fives. The majority are like 600 yards. Like the biggest, most easiest rudimentary thing that I found to look at is there's a couple important factors. You've got to have distance, right? So tomorrow in Atlanta, drive versus the New York Golf Club, Xander out is a huge blow. Now you have Cameron Young, who's the longest player in the field, but Ricky Fowler and Matt Fitzpatrick are at a significant disadvantage, particularly if they're going to be teeing off on the par 5 holes. Last year they ranked, Ricky was 261st on tour in driving distance. Fitzpatrick was outside of the top 200. You take Thomas, Cantlay, Horschel are all significantly longer. When you look at strokes gained over just the last 30 rounds, just strokes gained total. Like, let's look at really, rudimentary stats just to see how a guy's playing, right? I'm not going to try to draw any conclusions, but Cam Young is 136th. This is all PGA Tour players. Fowler's 143rd. Fitzpatrick's 145. I mean, all three guys on Atlanta are playing a lot better than them. Thomas, Cantlay are playing well. Horschel's won recently. I think that matchup is relatively lopsided now that they're lacking the number 2 and the number 2 player in the world, number 1 ranked player in TGL. Interesting that odds opened up minus 115 on both sides. I put that out the other day, obviously kind of hinting that I was taking Atlanta, and I think it was the right side. It's now up to minus 145. We'll see where that's at tomorrow, but I want to continue to understand the tech because I do feel like now that you have the player lineups have been released earlier, the course has been released earlier, as we start to understand the nuances of some of these holes, and many of them just want to see you bomb it. They want ball speed. That's what's fun. The teams with significant length, like that Bay team with Ludwig, Wyndham, Minwoo Lee when he finally plays, you got guys who can really pound the ball out there. I think it's going to be a huge advantage for those teams.
I just want to say one more thing before we move forward, because I think and Dame brings up a really good point in the chat. If not everybody has access to bet, that's going to be one of the biggest deterrents for the success moving forward of it. But I have given this answer for what feels like the last 2 years. And, betting is all about value and edges. And I have made this argument over and over again that if you look at golf and you look at where golf currently sits, when I got into the space and I started covering golf content for RotoBaller in 2018, there were so many market inefficiencies that took place. It was this very watered down to where a lot of the resources went to other sports and they weren't really putting out. It was more of this casual market to where you had some sharp bettors in it. And I think they were just kind of, just putting things out there. And I've always said that there were certain matchups that would be released. I am a matchup bettor through and through above what anything else I do. And there would be this discrepancies that would always come into play for where on specific courses, you would have golfers that should not be matched up against one another. And you would have these really large edges that could take place. And as we've moved forward over the last, I would say 18 months, give or take, it's become a lot more complicated to find value in specifically matchup markets. I think placement markets have also become more efficient. And with that, it's a harder game to beat now. And a lot of times that when you have these off the radar sort of things, like, the WNBA was there for a while to where it wasn't a mainstream sport and there was a huge edge to be had in the WNBA. TGL kind of possesses that same upside potentially if they're not necessarily putting the resources in the way that they should. So from a pure gambling perspective and nothing else, that part is what intrigues me more than anything. I would agree with you, though. I want to understand what I'm betting, and I haven't even watched enough of it at this point to where, like, if you're telling me now that we are gearing things towards distance above anything else, maybe that's where the edge ends up being with it. But it'll be interesting to see how the market ends up reacting to that because, as I've said numerous times, like, we both provide a lot of gambling content. We talked about it before the show. You go through ebbs and flows throughout the course of time. You're on a heater, you're on a cold streak, you're on a heater. Those heaters carry you a really long way with it. But it would be nice from gambling and just looking at value to be able to find another place to find edge in the market. So I'd be curious to see where that ends up landing.
Yeah, and I'm working with them as well. I'm hoping to talk to them more tomorrow about getting some of the data feeds that they have, just in terms of like general greens and regulation, fairways hit, that kind of stuff. Because I think as we see, what's interesting is I believe there are 45 total holes, and they're selecting a rotation of 15 per match. So as we start to be more familiar with the holes and see what is rewarded and what may be de-emphasized on a certain holes, I think that there becomes a point in the season where we can make an educated pick on this thing based on the information that we've been given, based on what we've seen when some of the numbers start to come out. So I think we'll get to that point. One of the issues that I love about TGL is the pace of it. I love the shot clock. I love the fact that it's fast moving. I think that addresses a particular problem that has emanated throughout the PGA Tour for a while. There was talk about it yesterday on Twitter, 5.5-hour rounds at the Amex. It seems like something that everyone in the room understands, but nobody is really taking that step to mitigate it. Does it bother you?
Here's the thing, Joe. I am probably the outlier in this entire situation here. You talked about at the beginning of the show. I will not provide a pick until all the information is out there. So I like Brian Harmon. I might be one of the only people that gives that answer. But yeah, when Brian Harmon waggles 100 times, it's frustrating to watch. But I would say for myself, more so than most people, I understand wanting to get everything correct. You're playing for a lot of money. There's legacies on the line. It doesn't bother me as much as it would bother most people, but it's the same problem that has occurred with baseball over the course of time. Is we are in a different generation now. People's attention spans are a lot shorter. People want a fast-moving game and a fast-moving sport. And golf on television is kind of the thing that everybody always jokes about. You and I don't think this, but you put it on in the background and people use it to fall asleep. Like I can't tell you how many people have told me that over the course of time. That's the unfortunate truth from the general population. And if we want this to continue growing, and whether it's just golf, TGL, whatever it is, you do need to have a quicker pace of everything. And just to very quickly go back to your other point, if we're talking about value here, there's like 50 plus courses a year that we're looking at. If you're telling me that there's like 2.5 courses worth of holes that we're really looking at, there is that's where the edge ends up being found with it. So, maybe golf, the ultimate thing here is you find the middle to where you use a lot of what works with TGL, you implement it onto the PGA Tour, and then you have some of that more robust, fast-paced movement that a lot of people do want.
Totally agree. Here's one thing that the PGA Tour, I will give them credit for, seeing a potential problem and just making a change, and it's become normalized. While at the time it was so weird a few years ago when they did this, now it's fine. It so quickly becomes normalized. We're starting on Wednesday this week. We've got Farmers Insurance Open. We've got Torrey Pines North and South golf courses. Some similarities, a lot of differences. Obviously, the South is one of the longer courses that we play all year. The Poa grass has really tiny greens. One thing I noted looking at the GCSAA report is that the superintendent said it's the driest winter he has ever experienced in 9 years. Their last significant rain event was early April of last year. I think the property last year was very wet at this event. I think this property is going to be highly dried out. Maybe that helps the fairways run a little bit. I think it probably firms up the greens a little bit. And on a course, which is notoriously pretty hard for hitting greens in regulation, I think that number could get even harder this year, bringing into play some more things like around the green play and scrambling ability and bunker play and stuff like that. What are your just general notes on, are you mostly, how do you go about weeks like this, Spencer? Are you focusing solely on the South course, which is going to see 3 out of 4 rounds, or are you sprinkling in like a little bit of North stuff just to get a full encompassing view of what's going on?
Joe, it's a good question. I do have a very strong take in this direction, and you're going to hear a lot of the same answers, whether you read an article, listen to it on a podcast, of what is the optimal path for modeling when you get a split course rotation. It's very easy to look at the South here, and everybody's going to kind of come up with the same answer. Long iron proximity. You have these long, narrow setups, thick rough. I'm a contrarian person by nature. The contrarian in me is not even going to try to discredit any of that. I think when you look at the South, if you're building anything other than that, you are going about it the wrong way. The one thing for me that I would say is the way that I am trying to get different with my research this week is I would argue that the industry as a whole tends to undervalue when you get these singular rounds at a property, specifically here at the North. Last week provided, I guess, a different version of that because 50% of the holes ended up, or of the rounds ended up taking place at the stadium course. The one thing that was interesting about that, though, is if you really look at what happened there, the players who were able to thrive, and I mean thrive much above expectation at that stadium course, were the ones that worked themselves up the leaderboard. You're going to get kind of a similar expectation here, just in the reverse of that answer, because when you look at the North property, that has historically been the venue where you can separate yourself from the field. If you look for the last 5 or 6 seasons, every single player outside of Pavon, which Pavon is the one that was a little bit more break even on the North compared to everybody else that had won. But if you look at the last 5 winners before that, you had people at the North that ended up winning the golf tournament that were between 4 to 9 under par when they played the North setup. And when you have a venue at the end of the day where your winning score ends up being in that 12, 13, 14 under par range, there's an ability to separate yourself from the rest of the pack. So 7 holes feature over a 20% birdie or better percentage. That includes 4 par 5 setups that when you dive into the birdie or better percentages between the South and the North, you have 36 and change percent at the South. You have 51% birdie or better rate at the North. A lot of that comes from at the South. It is pure POA. It is going to be a lot of that more difficult green complexes that you talked about, Joe. There is still that POA and bent grass mixture. The POA seeps through into the bent grass when you look at the North property, but it's flatter at its core. It still demands a lot of those long iron proximities from 200 plus yards, but it does it in a much different way, because when we talk about those 7 holes that feature that 20% birdie or better percentage, it's the par 5 locations where you can take advantage of it. It's the 3 shorter par 4s that are there. At the end of the day, this tournament still gets won and lost when 75% of the holes take place at the South property. But I think to truly win this title, and I put a 20% weight from a statistical perspective on the North property, which is a very substantial weight when you're looking at this. One of the things that I think most people would do, and I don't want to speak for everybody here and speak in such a blanket statement, is I think most people look at this and say, okay, we know Saturday and Sunday will be at the South. We know that the South is going to be one of the first 2 days. Let's just build it there. You're going to win or lose this golf tournament over the weekend. I view this as, if I can find the golfer on Wednesday or Thursday that can get himself to 8, 9 under par, and then find a profile that is flat enough over the next 3 days, that person can hang on and win the golf tournament. We've seen that iteration and that example happen over and over again. Yeah. So there are a lot of names that I am probably a little bit higher on than the market, just because of the way that I viewed them at the North property. But it's weeks like this that make it very intriguing, because everybody's going to have a different outlook, and it's different conversation between DFS and outright betting. DFS, you can have more of an idea of what everybody's doing. Outright betting, you're playing a number at the end of the day. But for DFS specifically, which is I know what we're not necessarily talking about here, I think there's big edges to be had for DFS.
Yeah, and in DFS too, you talked about the North. Especially if you're playing showdown contests, like you'd be amazed in looking back over the years at, you just blanketly think, okay, everyone's going to play all the guys on the North course. There's still an edge to be had there, because not everyone is thinking that way. Some people are just being contrarian to be contrarian. And I think that if you just blindly stack players on the North course, you automatically start this week with an edge in terms of showdown from a DFS perspective. From a outright betting perspective, like I think along the lines of what you think, really good long iron play, driving distance, carry distance, these type of things matter, particularly carry distance, because it's already hard to hit fairways. If you're able to carry it further in the rough, you come in with the shorter iron, it makes it easier to hold some of these actual really small green surfaces at Torrey Pines. But when you look at like Matthew Pavon, not really a long hitter. Max Homa is not the longest guy. You had Luke Liston there, but someone like Patrick Reed won and did it with short game. Even when Jason Day won, going back to John Rahm, Brant Snedeker, Scott Stallings, of course, Tiger won. I think there's different versions of this course, and some people see and look at like a U.S. Open type leaderboard at Torrey Pines and assess it that way. And I think that you have to think of it completely different. Like that U.S. Open year when it was Bryson, Rahm, Brooks, DJ, like all these big titans and powerful players were in it. This leaderboard is often not that, even though that winning score the last 5 years has been between 15 and 13 under par. What is the most like highest weighted stat in your model this week?
I guess it would be long iron proximity at the end of the day. You just get
Yeah.
such an egregious number of strokes that occur from there. You know, of the names that you talked about that have won that are not necessarily your prototypical distance long hitters. And I think that's a mistake that people make in general is you take such a nuanced perspective of it's one of those things like let's look at the Homa profile and the Day profile. Like let's just keep it to those two. What are they elite at? They are elite POA putters.
Yes.
There's the ability for them to separate in that area. I agree with you. I think short game statistics, it's one of the things that I always run in my model is I'm trying to find profiles of golfers and what is the highest impact profile of what is most important. It's the dispersion of scoring that I'm looking and diving into with it. When you're trying to make the cut here, you get this massive impact that comes into play with putting and around the green. Those are the guys that get themselves into the weekend. Those are the guys that give themselves the ability to work up the leaderboard. When you're looking to actually win this tournament, it does come into the long iron proximity and a little bit of total driving. There was a bit of an increase there with it. So there's a lot of long iron proximity that fit into my model. I also always run things not in such a basic capacity with it. You know, one of the examples for that I would give is I will dive a little bit deeper and look at how does somebody perform when you have thick rough off the tee. I'm not going to just use the straight total driving answer of distance plus accuracy. I would rather view this as find me similar courses where they're hard to hit fairways. Find me similar courses where there's thick rough. Find me the ability to scramble from those positions. Those are all the things that when you view my model at RotoBaller, those are all the answers that are built in under the radar with it. It's not just ever that straight approach of how long are you or how straight are you? Like those are never the two answers of exactly what I'm trying to find.
Totally. It's so nuanced. And like a great example this week, like blanketing just strokes gained approach. I think it's important to look at, but what we saw in terms of the where approach shots come from in the first 3 events of the year. Now, the Century is a long golf course, but what we found is that you hit a ton of wedges. You're inside of 160 yards on almost every approach at Kapalua. Sony is a lot of shorter approach shots. The Amex last week was a ton of wedge fest. And there are guys that fit that profile of hitting basically gap wedge to, let's call it 8 iron. And then there are guys who really excel. Like I did not love Sung J M last week because Sung J M is not that good of a wedge player anymore. His approach play, when you look at proximity, like inside of 150 yards is not great. Now he gets a big move up in my model this week because he's actually really good from 200 plus yards. That's what you find typically with most great iron players that you think of awesome ball strikers is they tend the further away you hit it, that's where they tend to increase their levels of separation. I'm just going to bring up my sort of stat model that I ran this week, Byron. I'm going to put the promo code up here. If you want to check this out, it's over at BetSperts. So this is the rabbit hole. Promo code is TORPICS if you want to get 25% off anything over at the rabbit hole. Here are the top 10 guys in terms of salary and where they ranked in my model. Ludwig, so 22nd in my stat model. So I did less this week with my model. I wanted to look at a lot of just strokes gained total stuff because what I noticed was an important factor in coming into this event is just short-term incoming form. Like even when Luke List won, he was playing really good sort of coming into this event. Obviously, Matthew Pavon was playing really well. Max Homa was sort of peaking where he was at in his career. If you're not playing really good golf and you're not in control of your golf ball, Torrey Pines will expose you, particularly at the South Course. If you're not hitting fairways, if you're not ball striking it well from 190 yards, you will get exposed out here. Hideki, number 1 ranked player in my model. You see here, strokes gained tee to green. So some of the filters you can apply here is I just looked at long golf courses, right? I added average long to very long golf courses. How's he doing on strokes gained tee to green there? Hideki, obviously, very well. Sungjae M, 6th in my model. Tony Finau, 10th. Some of the more surprising ones, Keegan Bradley, they're 13th. These stars, don't read too much into that, guys. Those are from last week. I just left them starred. But some of the, I had a couple surprising ones in here. Joseph Bramlett is one of those ones that just kind of breaks your model, what I ran this week. Obviously, 3rd in strokes gained off the tee. He's been really good on long golf courses. Really good stats around the green. Here's green and regulation rate on courses like just at Torrey Pines, greens and regulation over the last 5 years. Bramlett's inside the top 7 there. JJ Spawn up there once again. Alex Smalley rating out. Those are some of the guys that rated out pretty well this week. Dame, those are kind of the model guys that I have this week. Joanne, I have to mention, good evening to you as well. I hope that everything is okay. I hope that you're a nurse or something and you're not currently in the hospital, but we appreciate you listening as always. Spence, what are your thoughts on my top 10 here? There's a couple of really wonky ones, but I noticed you had Ludwig first, correct? I've got Hideki first. What puts Ludwig over the top for you this week?
It's 1-2 for me. There's not a massive disparity between the two. From weighted strokes gained total, Ludwig had a little bit of an advantage there. The other area where, I've talked about not overweighing distance or anything singular like that. I did run just for a 10% weight distance plus long iron proximity. Ludwig was the number 1 player in that territory, and he was also the number 1 player when I looked at specific win profiles of golfers. And you talked about this with Sungjae, and I want to trickle back to the Sungjae conversation because I was also lower on Sungjae last week. There were spots where I was correct. I played a lot of Justin Thomas. That ended up being right. Bet Justin Thomas outright. Didn't quite get there. Ended up losing to your Sepp Straka ticket, but Thomas put himself in position there. I ended up being wrong on Tony Finau. Went ice cold with the putter at the stadium course, ends up missing the cut. I thought Sungjae specifically, when you look at his profile last week, I agree with you 100%. It's not one of those prototypical venues. I know he had the course history that you would want to see. He was 28th, I want to say, in my model from a statistical perspective. He's still graded inside of the top 10 for me overall. A lot of that comes down to the course weight, the current form that you add to the mix there. But it is really important. And this is the one thing I want to stress for everybody listening. It is very important to understand that not every single tournament plays the same exact way. Just because the guy comes in on a heater doesn't mean that now if you don't switch the landscape on him, that it's not going to move in a positive or a negative direction there. And I think that when you get stuck with those rudimentary stats, the very simple strokes gained approach, the very simple stats that don't weigh anything further, you lose the narrative a little bit because you want to be weighing this out. It's one of the things that I do in my model. I weigh everything out to be a course specific fit for the venue that we are looking at that week. It doesn't mean that I necessarily get all the pieces right every single time. There's going to be some good that comes from it. There's going to be some bad that comes from it. I had a matchup last week, Joe, where I took Cameron Davis over Nick Taylor and ended up losing by 1. Cam Davis went OB on 18, missed to the right, which I hadn't seen anybody do the entire time. You have the whole world open there to the right. I don't know if he.
I didn't even know there was OB over there.
I don't know.
Stadium course?
Yes, I don't know what happened. I assume he hit the cart path and must have landed in the housing development. But like every single time you watch somebody play 18, if they did go right, and a lot of people went right because you're trying to avoid the water on the left, everybody was in rough. And you had so much rough to work with, but he went out of bounds somehow. And, it's one of those things where I trust my model. I trust my process. It ended up not being correct. Nick Taylor played much better than model expectation, kind of gave a whole theory of why Nick Taylor usually falls off after a win. Didn't necessarily come to fruition for me the way that I would want, but it's those answers over the course of time and how you build numbers that you trust the process. It's all about trusting the process. It's all about trusting the numbers there. So I agree with you on Sungjae being a much better fit this week. And I only have one outright on the card right now. I think you could make a very sound argument to go straight up to the top to Oberg. I think in that 10-1 range, it makes a lot of sense. But the only outright I currently have was Sungjae at 22-1. I think it's a really nice bounce back spot for him this week.
Great bounce back spot. And just to kind of, before I pull up the entire board, just to kind of hammer home that point on Sungjae a little bit more. So traditionally a very good wedge player. He's just been struggling a little bit in that regard, which is why I didn't like him at a course, which you're going to have to put a lot of wedges on, which is why I like to take a deeper look at course history besides just looking at the results. Look at what they were doing well at the time then. And has any of that changed? And one of those guys that I see big red flags for this week is Tony Finau. And here are the red flags. Usually you blanket look at course history and you're like, Finau crushes it here. But when I went back and looked, okay, so he had his best finish was T2 in 2021. Leading into that event, Tony Finau finished 4th at the Amex, 5th at the QBE shootout, 8th at Mayakoba. He finished 2nd at the Genesis right after. He was in really good form. He's gaining 8-9 strokes tee to green every week during that span. Now, fast forward the next year, 2022, Tony Finau misses the cut at the Farmers. He was highly regarded, shot even par, missed the cut. How was his form heading into that year, 2022? Well, 40th at the Amex, 19th at the Century, missed the cut at the Houston Open. Kind of looked a lot like it does this year. Now you go to last year, heading into the Farmers Insurance Open, T16 at the Amex, T7 at the Century, won the Houston Open. He was in fantastic form coming here, thus he top 10. This year, it's not good right now. I think that he's a little bit inflated. I think that a lot of people are going to run and jump on that course history number, and Tony Finau loves Torrey Pines. Tony Finau eats apart California. Well, he just missed the cut at the Amex. He was not great at the Century, lost strokes, ball striking, and off the tee at the Century. T23 at the Tour Championship. Obviously dealt with the injury this offseason, which I think probably impacted some of his training regimen. However he prepares to get ready for a season, that was clearly impacted in some way by having a surgery done, however minor it was, to the meniscus. Those are the type of things that I like to look at when it's a tournament that you're factoring in so much off the tee. Well, Tony Finau's 100th in this field in the last 36 rounds, and he's lost strokes off the tee in 3 consecutive events. He's not playing like the Tony Finau did when he came in all those years and crushed it at the Farmers. Can he turn it around this week? We know it's golf. Anyone can, and he's a great long-term course profile fit. But as it heads into this week in particular, I see the same red flags that I saw last week with a player like Sungjae.
My take on Finau is this. I think if you look at the outright number on him, it leaves a ton to be desired. It's that course history answer that you just talked about, Joe. I got into this space. I talked about it at RotoBaller in 2018, but I started providing content and work for myself. I had a website, it was teeoffsports.com, and the very first tournament that I covered was this event. And it was Tiger's comeback, and all the news was around that. And Finau was not quite what Finau is viewed to be at this moment. Finau was more in that 30, 40, 50 to 1 range every single week. And my whole article that I had written for that was that at some point in his career, Tony Finau will win at Torrey Pines. Still stand by that narrative, and I still think that it eventually happens. But the problem that has come into play right now is that you get this 20 to 22 to 1 number to where the market has so aggressively tried to take people off of him that I don't really see value in that number for him to win this event. I think if we're talking GPP contest, I am fine betting on some of that upside, specifically if he's going to come in lower owned. I don't know if that's going to be the answer. I have no ownership in my model right now, and I would probably lean in the direction that he will be popular just because it is Torrey Pines at the end of the day with it. But to me, he's kind of a boom or bust commodity, but the problem is the boom is not as high as what a 20 to 1 number would indicate.
Totally. Mark, you and I believe Joe Nicely as well. That Gracerman final double bogey cost you a lot of money. And the shot he hit, Mark, to get like the opportunity to make an eagle on, what was that, 16, and then miss the putt, despite being the best putter and the hottest putter right now on the PGA Tour. I can feel that sting a little bit. Spence, let's go ahead and pull up the odds board. Let's see who else we like to bet. All right, mention Ludwig and Hideki sort of neck and neck at the top, either 10 or 11 to 1 are the betting prices after the withdrawals from who would have been the two favorites in Morikawa and Xander Schauffele. Sung J M there at 20 to 1. Tony Finau at 22, Jason Day 25, Keegan Bradley 25, Gracerman 25. Feels like it feels like all the value with Gracerman has completely been siphoned out without getting that victory. But I also want to remember my previous point and guys have dropped breadcrumbs in their current form heading into this event before they win. You could see it coming, and you can kind of see that with Gracerman. The one I wanted to ask you about specifically was the same one that Mark was asking about. Will Zalatoris shaping up? Is he ready to win? Mark, here is why I'm optimistic, is because I do feel like he's one of the premier ball strikers in the field. He's got decent course history here. And what is always kills Will Zalatoris predominantly is the putter. I have reason to be a little bit optimistic this week. In 4 out of the last 5 appearances at the Farmers Insurance Open, he's gained at least 1.5 strokes putting. I think that if he gains any strokes putting this week, he's going to likely find himself in contention. I think that he's hungry. I think that he's eager to win. And I think that he knows that this is one of those perfect course fits that are on the schedule with the form the way it is, that this is his chance, maybe with a couple of withdrawals. And you take out Xander and Morikawa, you open up 15 to 20% of the win equity in this event. I think that he's one of the people that are anxious to capture that opportunity and could potentially come through. How do you feel about old Willie Z?
I mean, I think 22 is, or 20 or whatever, whatever we're looking at, is starting to push the envelope a little bit of where true value should be. Here's what I will say about Zalatoris, though, if we are trying to find a reason to be optimistic. So I've talked a lot during this show about course-specific fits. And so one of the things that means for me is that when I reproject a recalculated weighted strokes gained total inside of my model, I'm going to look specifically on around the green with POA. I'm going to look specifically with strokes gained putting on POA. You talked about this, Joe, whether it's this venue or I'll even go a step further with it, whether it's any POA venue. There are big increases in Zalatoris's profile. 34th in around the green with POA instead of 95th in my model. He's 52nd in strokes gained putting with POA versus 87th elsewhere. That's kind of what you're trying to find for a tournament that at the end of the day, I talked about at the beginning, what wins this event according to my model? Ball striking. Well, that's going to be one of the boxes that he's going to always check. And then on the opposite end of that is, what are we looking at from a profile fit? And that's kind of the boxes that we're looking at with Zalatoris there. So there's a reason why the market is pushing itself in this direction. I cannot personally get there at that price. And maybe that is just a blind spot for me I never find value on Zalatoris if I'm being completely frank with the situation here. But this is also something that if you look at my model pre-injury, this was a top 10 player in the world, according to my model. You look at this model post-back surgery and what we got last year from him, he fell completely off the map. And one of the things with my model that I at least want to talk about, and as you know, Joe, I've mentioned it many times on the show, but for anybody who's not aware of how I build my model, I run it from a longer term duration than most people in this space. It's a 1 year running model that runs over the course of 2 years, essentially. So as this season goes on, more of the data will put into this season, but it's going to date back to last season throughout the entire year until the very end. So Zalatoris is going to have some red flags in the profile based off of that answer. But even with that being said, he has already catapulted himself inside of the top 10 expected players for me at this event. And that's with a profile that has some red flags in it because of something that I don't necessarily think is going to be a massive concern. I think this is a safe golfer. I think that this is somebody that has a big upside here. But it goes back to what I kind of said about Finau. It's that the market with Finau and Zalatoris, for two different reasons, has pushed this number very far down.
Yeah, agree with you there. I took another guy right in this range, and I'm leaning towards someone at the top. I haven't made a decision yet. I want to bet Ludwig. Just witnessing Ludwig in person was special. The guy has a presence about him, and it just felt different. rubbed off on me a little bit, but I think Hideki being like the number one by a good margin in my model also could put me over the edge. I did end up taking a 30-1 on Keegan Bradley. Second here 2 years ago. I think that for me, it's that is enough for me to sort of check the box of, can he have success on this golf course, right? Is his course history phenomenal? No, but can he show up and have success on this golf course? Yes, he's proven that. Now, how's the really recent form? I think it's fantastic. I think over the last, if you look at 5 to 10 events, I think he's one of the top 5 players in the field. Played really well at the Century, backed that up at the Sony, so was good at both Hawaii events with the T6. Talk about a guy, and I talked about Zalatoris, who I think is coming into the beginning of this season super motivated and hungry. I don't think anyone is more ready for the 2025 golf year than Keegan Bradley right now. Just playing great golf, gaining a ton ball striking. You know, if you look at his last 4 starts, BMW, he won, gained 9.3 ball striking. Century gained 3.3. Gained 3.5 at the Sony. He's putting it there together, has had really good performances putting at the Farmers in the past on POA. I don't know that that's the most predictive thing for Bradley, who tends to be a little bit volatile in that regard, but I really trust his ability to consistently hit fairways, be long enough, and be good enough with those long irons to ball strike this place to death. And I thought the 30-1 was a good number, and it looks like most of the markets have shifted somewhere between 25 and 30 at this point.
Yeah, Zalatoris and Bradley technically both fall under the same mentality of you throw them at a more difficult course and their upside usually increases. So, you talked about this, Joe, when you were going through your model, and I don't know what the exact category that you were discussing. It was like difficult scoring, I think, or long courses or whatever it was. So I have a category in my model that's strokes gained. It took a combination of 50-50 split at long courses and at difficult scoring courses. And just to throw out the top 5, because I think it does deliver a unique perspective to dive deeper into. And it's probably a reason why both of us like Hideki, which is why he's number 2 in my model. I know he's number 1 in yours, but Hideki's number 1 in that category. Keegan Bradley is number 2. Max Homa, who has been the course savant here, and I know that he is going to be the discussion to be had, because do you trust the course form or do you trust the current form? And I thought he looked good at the Century. I thought that was the first time that he actually started to put the pieces together. And we'll get to home in a second, because I'm still considering putting an outright ticket on him. He was the biggest mover that I had in my model in expected scoring for this course versus just the last 24 rounds. He was the biggest climber that I had for me. So he ended up being 3rd in that category. Sam Stevens, 4th. Very surprising return there. Didn't expect Stevens to necessarily pop as much as he did, but you think of the distance that he has, it makes sense. And then 5th was Will Zalatoris. So it kind of goes to a lot of the points that you've made with Hideki, Bradley, Zalatoris. These are historically good, long, difficult course players that kind of have this pedigree that finds success at properties that look and resemble Torrey Pines.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's talk about Homa, because I'm not going to be a part of it. I understand there's some upside based on the course here, but I think that it may be too soon. He has won top 25 since Valhalla, since the PGA Championship. He can't seem to get inside the top 20. I just can't imagine. Now, obviously, he's a person that has severe upticks when you play in California, right? When you play on POA, when the comfortability of being a POA pusher like Max Homa is a lot to understand. But obviously, going through some swing changes. Last year was not a good year for him. I'm not sure what's going on with the caddy, but I know he had Spieth's caddy on the bag at the Century, so maybe something to continue to monitor there. But the guy has just been getting absolutely slaughtered off the tee. And I think that when you look at a place like the Farmers, I think that you have to be pretty good in that regard. When he won here, when he won here, he did not really do any damage off the tee. It looks like he gained 8.3 on approach and barely a stroke off the tee in the year that he won at this event. So maybe that's not his particular route to victory, but I just can't get behind it now until I start seeing some inklings of sprinkling in some top 10s.
So Dane put into the chat that Homa's the most overrated golfer in the last year. You can't really dispute that. It's funny because everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people kept going back down the well over and over and over with him again last year, and the form never changed. And that was one of the biggest decreasers in my model over a 12-month period, essentially, to where I entered last year believing Max Homa was a legitimate top 5-6 golfer in the world. And I exited the year, I mean, he's outside of the top 50 of any model, any iteration, any tournament that I threw him onto, even at tournaments where you would expect him to find success. The Pro Core, Fortinet, whatever the name of it is now. That's a tournament where he's found a ton of success. My model didn't even like him there. This is the first event, which is what is intriguing to me, that the data started to push back in the direction of Homa. I have not seen this for the longest time. You know, Joe, you talked about it. It's 148th in this field in strokes gained off the tee over his last 24 rounds. He's the number one player in strokes gained putting. That at least means something to me. But it was everything else that I was looking at. And this is with a very sloppy profile of data that is going to give you a lot of the bad last year. Number 2 for this course in weighted strokes gained total. Number 3, when you take long and difficult scoring, as I talked about, the win profile, which we have seen from him in the past, is second in my model there. And then one of the things that I was at least encouraged about is if we want to say that the driver is a problem, which certainly is, the distance hasn't been there, the accuracy hasn't been there. 96th in my model in this field for driving distance, 112th when you look at driving accuracy. But when you look at comp courses, whether that's narrow fairways or thick rough, he ended up jumping way up in my model at similar courses. So, you know, if there's a belief that this California feel, hard course narrative, whatever it is that meets his eyes at this property can come into play, the proximity numbers were a lot better than what I've seen from him specifically for this venue. So where I think you could potentially be correct, it is asking a lot for him to go from not being in contention for practically 8+ months to now winning an event. But I do think at the bare minimum of that answer, I'd like to see where the ownership lands for DFS, because Dame's answer of the most overrated golfer has now started to seep into everybody's head that he's almost unplayable until we see otherwise. And when I am trying to pivot and find leverage, that's typically the spots where I'm attempting to go. You sometimes get burnt in a terrible fashion when you go down that route. And it's one of those things like in our RotoBaller roundtable article that we do, one of the categories is the player that I am playing that you should not play. This is the standard prototypical for me, insert Max Homa, because I understand what the floor is. But if the ownership can be low enough, I think the ceiling is higher, even if we're not talking pure win equity, but just a top 10 this event. And this is the first time he's popped in my model in like 8 months. So that means something to me when I see these deviations from whatever the recent norm and baseline has been.
Good buy low spot on the Homa coin. Let's look at some other guys kind of in this mid-range. McNeely's at 35 to 1. Model kind of liked him a good bit this week. Shane Lowry, 35 to 1. Taylor Pendrith, 35 to 1. Kitayama, 40 to 1. Luke Clanton is back at 45 to 1. Siwoo, 45. Bo Hostler, 50. Ben Griffin, 50. 55 on Harry Hall. 55 on JJ Spawn. Aaron Rye. Tell me about Aaron Rye. I like the guy right under him. I'll try to make a case in a second for Steven Yeager at 65 to 1, which is a bet I took. But glancing, I had a strange one in like Joseph Bramlett, and there were a couple of weird ones in my model. Spence, I looked at yours. Aaron Rye, 4th in your model. Does that mean you automatically back him when someone is 65 to 1 and 4th in your model?
I haven't decided what I'm doing with him in the outright market right now. One of the things that I talked about is I think to actually win this event, you need to show the upside inside my model at the North property. It's fringe right now in that territory. Not bad. He's still fine. But if we're talking about actual win equity and winning an event, different discussion to be had. One of the first bets I made that was, I guess it would be the first bet I made that was not an outright bet is, and it seems we move the market. We inside of our Discord, Joe, at RotoBaller, we move numbers very quickly in there. And sometimes the numbers end up moving back. And I think the price has centered back to where it was. So I bet Aaron Rai plus 106 over Ben Griffin. We shifted that out to about minus 115. The market has come back now into that plus 100, plus 105 range. So you can still get about what I got that at, but it is such a great profile fit for this course. And a lot of it will always be at the end of the day when I take matchups. I'm trying to find in a tournament with a cut somebody that I am looking to fade. I'm one of the biggest advocates of Ben Griffin out there. I feel like I bet Ben Griffin more than most people, but it's very important to note, and we keep going back to this answer, Joe, not every single course is made the same way. He's like, we always talk about Bermuda Burns, like Bermuda Griffin is a real thing. All the putting splits that you see from Ben Griffin on a Bermuda course versus POA or any other split is quite of a stark difference there. So, I am at the bare minimum of this right now, betting Aaron Ryan, the matchup there. I think for me, the couple deciding factors are going to be, do I want to have a two-man card, which is usually more exposure than I would take, and go Sungjae and Oberg? Right. Or do I want to spread this out a little bit, go Sungjae, potentially Homa, potentially Aaron Rai, potentially Shane Lowry? My model liked him from an upside standpoint. The other name that I'll at least throw out there as we keep moving down this board, I really like Daniel Berger. I don't know if I think Berger is going to necessarily get the victory here, but I'm trying to find ways to get exposure to him here, whether that's a top 10 bet, maybe potentially a matchup. He was one of 6 or 7 players for me that graded inside of the top 35 for every single category that I ran that this week. And that's like, just to give you the names. That's Oberg, it's Hideki, it's Sungjae, it's Finau for me, Shane Lowry, Siwoo Kim, and then Daniel Berger there would be the 7th name. So I thought that price in the 60 to 1 plus range was interesting on Berger.
Yeah, I can get behind you there on Berger. The guy for me that I mentioned, though, I'm going with Papa Jaeger. 65 to 1, played great at this event last year. It just, the incoming form, matching that with having a decent bit of confidence coming back to Torrey Pines is makes a big difference for me. 2 top 3s in his last 4 starts. Dominant on approach. Now, he's kind of bleeding strokes off the tee and losing them, but I think that it's just inopportune decision making. Like, he lost 3.5 strokes off the tee at the Sony Open. Okay, how much of that was when he decided to take driver on that dogleg hole and put it into some guy's pool and had to re-tee and essentially lost himself the tournament? Now, Jaeger's an aggressive player. I love the fact that he goes for it when in contention and is not one of those guys to lay up. I think that this is one of those courses that probably reward that more than some others, but has the upside to potentially win when he gets it right. Was one of the only guys to like down the stretch on a Sunday actually slay Scotty Scheffler last year when he did end up winning in Houston. Was great at the Farmers last year, gained 4.4 in approach, has these really big spike approach weeks like we saw at the Sony where he gained 4.6, gained over 6 strokes putting. I think there is a lot of volatility when you play someone like Steven Jaeger, but top 10 guy in the field in terms of driving distance, which is an asset that I think that he's worked extremely hard on continuing to build. And he's one of the longer players in the field right now and still above tour average in terms of fairways hit. Like the total driving of Steven Jaeger, I wish that some things were a little bit sharper in terms of long-term proximity approach play, but I think that inherently goes with the volatility. Like when I look at his strokes gained approach, plus 4.6, plus 0.3, minus 1, plus 3.2, minus 3.2, minus 4.16. There's just big swings there where I think if you were to exclusively look at the weeks where he plays really well and could potentially peak, those numbers, you will see a significant bump. Stevie Yeggs was my guy at 65 to 1. Speaking of which, what up, Sia? There's a long shot that we all like to see. The best looking man in the golf industry. Good to have you, Sia. Catch you soon. We got to get you back on the show. Anyone, Spencer, that you got in the long shot range? If I kind of open this up, I've gotten lucky. I've hit 2 of them recently. I'll give you one of my favorites this week. And card will not be out Wednesday because that's too late. So I'll have the full card up tomorrow. Give me one name that you have in this like 100 to 1 or above range you think is worth maybe a top 20 bet, because I know you like to you don't like to stake a whole lot at 100 plus to 1.
I mean, if I am looking for a profile here, and this might be getting a little bit gross. By the way, I like the Jaeger shout out. I believe he was leading this tournament after 2 days. One of the best profiles for me at the North Course. It's going to come down to, can he make putts on POA greens? Some of the driving stuff that I really liked about him is I talked about when courses get narrow and courses get a lot of rough. He was inside of the top 10 for me in both of those areas. So we have seen this improvement with distance, and also in the past with courses that are similar, the upside that's taken into effect. And like, I chased that Jaeger victory probably more than most people. He was one of the names for me last year that I was just higher on than consensus over and over again. I did have him in Houston that week where he took down Scotty Scheffler. It's one of those profiles that possesses a lot of upside. I think for an actual outright ticket, I'm probably not going to go deeper this specific week than Daniel Berger. I think that's going to probably be about as far as I'm going to stretch this out. I do tend to think that this top of the board is very strong at this tournament. There are, we're talking about like Will Zalatoris and Finau, and like we can be higher or lower on some of those names than each other, like when we have this discussion, but these are still real strengths. And that's before we even get into like the cream of the crop of the Sungjaes, Hideki's, and Obergs. I kind of just feel like this is going to be a week where one of the elite names at sub 50-1 is going to win it. But if I was to throw one name out there that I am higher than the market right now, and this is the player for DraftKings, the only player in the $6,000 range that I was much higher on than everybody else, and that had an upside perspective in my model, I'm going to go with Eric Van Rooyen. There are some terrible traits inside of my model for Van Rooyen, specifically on some of these long par fours at the South. And when I mean bad, Joe, I'm talking about like bottom of the barrel inside of my model. And that's going to be the concern there. But I posted this in December before the year started. And I talked about players that over from 2023 to 2024 saw the biggest increase in projection in my model. This doesn't necessarily mean that they were an elite talent now. It doesn't necessarily mean that I think Van Rooyen's a top 10 player on tour. But what I am trying to express is Van Rooyen went from one of the worst golfers in my model in 2023 to a legitimate top 50 profile for the entire encapsulation. And at the right course, you can even get a little bit higher than that. So safety for me for Van Rooyen's 53rd, that kind of talks about that missed cut potential, but he does jump inside of the top 20 for me for some of just the pure upside totals. So I'm going to have exposure to Van Rooyen, maybe more inside of the top 20 market than the outright tickets there. I do think Jack Fisher's call of Jesper Svensson for a top 20 makes a lot of sense. He was a very unfortunate miscut participant last week. He should have made the weekend. Things went south for him on Saturday there. Yeah. I think he has a game to him that is very good fit for this course. So I kind of like that shout out from Jack, but I will go with Van Rooyen for the sake of this.
Okay, we didn't talk about this. It's crazy that you said this. First of all, let me mention Alex Smalley. Got Alex Smalley 100-1. Top 10 in my model. Number one guy in terms of the last 36 rounds, strokes gained off the tee. So I think trending in a very positive direction. A couple of good starts to start the year for Alex Smalley. But this one, I've absolutely almost zero data to back up. But this is my Hard Rock app. I was trying to pull this up over there. Of Steven Jaeger and Eric Van Rooyen. I took Van Rooyen 200-1. I don't even know why, Spencer. I just got this feeling as I was going down those lips. Actually, a couple of decent starts on the DP World Tour when I was looking at some data golf stuff. It has picked up a little bit of distance, put a new driver in the bag recently, is highly accurate, possesses the ability to go super low when you look at some rounds that he had at the Worldwide Technology, rounds that he had at the Honda Classic, like crazy birdie streak runs where if he can get off to a really hot start at something like the North Course and shoot 6-7 under par, I think he can find himself in a potential leverage spot there. Funny that you mentioned that. Our boy Sia has a question, and I wanted to ask you about these two because I'm actually torn on these two. Theegala or Penrith, and these are two guys that I was looking at kind of in that mid-range, and here's why I'm torn. Taylor Pendrith rated out excellent for me. I mentioned that Alex Smalley is number one strokes gained off the tee over the last 36 rounds. Taylor Pendrith is second. Third in the field in driving distance, fourth in strokes gained total. so good in a lot of different areas, ended up being 4th total in my model. Do I trust that I think he can win the Farmers Insurance Open? That's where I get a little squirrely with it. Now, Sahith, almost at the same price, I trust his winning ability and upside and his moxie when in contention, but almost the opposite. 75th in strokes gained off the tee, 77th in strokes gained total in recent form, 112th in strokes gained approach over the last 36 rounds. A guy that from a statistical standpoint is really struggling, but I think name recognition, California, a lot of things align for me that make sense, where I think would make a much better outright bet than like a DFS cash game contest play. Any thoughts on differentiating those two guys for you?
I think you kind of said it best. So if you look inside my model, I'll give you the exact ranks across the board. So I run it from an overall rank, upside that is more of a win equity answer. A lot of GPPs put into that too, and then safety. So Pendrith is 8th overall for me. So I also had him inside the top 10. 17th for upside, 6th for safety. I tend to agree with your sentiment. To me, he feels like a really safe, solid play, to where I don't know if I necessarily think he's going to win this event. Where if you take the Thagala profile, 16th for me overall, 13th for upside, 25th for safety. It's that exact opposite thing, to where he's erratic. He's erratic off the tee. There are some concerns with that. But when he puts the pieces together, the upside portion of my model does like him a little bit. I'm probably going to fade him entirely. With that being said, for DFS, I think that volatility and I think the California narrative might end up making him a little bit more popular than I would care to see. But if I was to bet Thagala, I'm going to bet him in that range of to win top 10. I'm going to bet on any of the upside markets, to where if you put Thagala against Pendrith in a matchup, I would very slightly to maybe marginally in that like minus 105 to minus 120 range. I'd have to run the numbers to see exactly where it would land, but I would favor Pendrith in that spot. Not a substantial difference, but I do think that he's just a safer golfer at the end of the day.
Listen, I'm not ready at this point to be the first guy to start pitching TGL stat profiles in terms of relation to a PGA Tour event, but Sahith looked awesome at TGL. He was pounding the ball way past anyone. I was shocked at his driving distance. Dame brings up Justin Rose, looks great. He looked great at TGL. I couldn't believe Justin Rose showed up. He was in that like GB and I Ryder Cup thing. He was the captain of the team. Flew to TGL, was the star. He was throwing up the LA, and like he was a showman. Justin Rose, very personable. Speaking of very personable, awesome to have you on the show, man. Shout out to the entire RotoBaller PGA team. Thank you for allowing me to do this for another year, Spencer, and contribute to the group over there and the organization that I know that you are one of certainly the pillars of. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Wish you all the best of luck this year. Hopefully my luck a little bit in this heater can rub off on you a little bit, but you just keep doing your thing, and I'll know that you'll have another winning year like you always do, brother.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate you having me on. And as you said, we have a lot of great things happening at RotoBaller. So if you're not doing so already, check out the great work from Joe Nicely, Ian, myself. We have a really great team over there with a lot of strong contributors.
At Tee Off Sports, Spencer, I'll catch you soon, buddy. Later.
Thank you, Joe.
Gang, so appreciative of you guys in the chat. It was great to see so many of you this week. Thank you for taking some time out of the national championship. I'm going to pop the game on here. It was 7-7 when I started. I don't know what it's at right now, but as an Ohio native, I'm the one guy who's not a Buckeyes fan. So I'm going for the Irish tonight. We'll see if they can hang around in that game. I took 8.5 points. Listen, you got a pick for this week. Drop it in the chat. I want to see your pick. I'm going to give away. I'm back to giving away stuff, right? Preferred Lines t-shirts. This is my favorite shirt that we do. Got a little hibiscus action, top-notch quality, heavy cotton tee. Give me your pick to win the Farmers. I'm going to pick someone out this week randomly, and I'll contact you. Make sure you drop your X/Twitter username in there as well, so I find out how to contact you to get your address. Going to spread some love. Continuing, hopefully, a streak, and maybe we make it 3 in a row. My name is Joe Idoni. This has been the Preferred Lines program this week for the Farmers Insurance Open. I wish you guys all the best of luck. I'll talk to you next time. Peace.